is a D6 generation pip. Yeah, one of those dots on the side of a six-sided die. Yeah, a pip. A short pip. Little something. About anything gaming related. Sometimes featuring Craig, sometimes featuring Russ. We'll see what's coming up today.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another D6G pip. I'm excited to be back today. And I have a series of pips I now want to do based on all the cool hotness I got at Gen Con 2021. I really couldn't wait to record this one for you. As I mentioned in the Gen Con sort of summary episode I did a couple weeks ago, obviously got a lot of great energy back from going to Gen Con. It was so wonderful to meet so many great people, but it was also great to sort of chat with game designers, play some new games, and of course, add some new games to my collection. And spoke about Drop Dungeon already last time. And, Drop Dungeon, what's interesting about Drop Dungeon is it's the kind of game. So when I go to a convention like Gen Con, I always, a couple things go through my brain as I start thinking about what am I going to buy to add to my board games? Because that's going to happen. I mean, it doesn't really go, it goes without saying I'm going to buy stuff. The real question is how much am I going to buy? What am I going to get? So, of course, I'm usually pretty aware of some of the hotness coming out. Those are always on my radar, and I'll always usually pick up one or two games that I know are by designers and publishers that are just going to be fantastic. And I did do that. I picked up The Night Cage and Ankh, so very excited to talk more about those in the future. But today I wanted to talk about another one of the games like Drop Dungeon that I picked up that I didn't have any awareness of prior to Gen Con. Now, Drop Dungeon I bought after playing the demo. And so that game I had a little bit of experience with, not much, but just played it there. And I was like, this is really interesting. It's really innovative. It's really different. So I picked it up. But there's usually always one game that I buy that is totally sort of basically judging the book by its cover, right? I just no playthrough, no demo. And that's either because the demo looks too long or too complex, or just takes too long, or there's a line, or I just want to try. I just want to go for it. I'm just a little bit impulse every once in a while. So the game this time that was that game for me was Windward. And I found Windward during one of my Gen Con secrets. So I'm going to share with you one of the secrets of Gen Con. So shh, don't tell anybody, because if everybody finds out about this secret, it won't be as cool and chill as it is today. So shh, this is just between you and me. One of the things I love to do, so the very first day of Gen Con, which is usually a Thursday, everybody gets very excited about the vendor hall, which opens at 10 a.m., and to go get the latest and greatest hotness, and they start to line up. Now, this year the line wasn't very long because there was much less attendees than normal, but in normal years, this line goes on forever and ever and ever. So it's become my habit. Oh, and a lot of people start to think that because there's this massive line, Gen Con starts at 10 o'clock on Thursday. So they have a late breakfast and they get in line. Or they get in line stupid early, like they sit there and wait and play games in line, which is fun and social. Or they go out to breakfast and come back after the line's already kind of got through, because maybe then I don't want to get to the hotness and go right to the vendor hall. But what I like to do is there's this large gaming hall next to the vendor hall that actually usually is open, all night throughout Gen Con. And on Thursday, it's usually open at 7 or 8 in the morning. And what this hall is used for is both open play, but also a lot of the game companies have their demos areas set up there. And a lot of the early morning demos are set up and already going at 8 in the morning on Thursday. So I like to walk through this area, which is a lot less crowded than you would expect. And the cool part about it is you can see a lot of the hotness and a lot of the things companies are excited to show, not only just not for sale, but they are all there and set up. And before even some of the players are playing the game, just being set up and configured. So you have a moment to kind of look at the game. Maybe one of the folks who's going to be teaching the game is there setting it up, and they have a moment to chat with you, and they're fresh for the day and they're not feeling beat down. So I love to do this little thing. And this is where I saw Windward as I was walking through the hall, just kind of waiting for the vendor hall opening and seeing what I would see. I saw this game set up on this table that I had never seen before. And the first thing that attracted to me was its table presence. So the board is round. And I don't mean it's a round board on a square game board, with black edges where there's score trackers and stuff, and the main part of the board is round. No, I mean the actual physical game board is a set of sort of triangular shaped sort of puzzle pieces that, when all linked together, creates a round, sort of brownish gas giant planet look with hexes on it, which immediately already kind of caught my eye. I'm like, well, that's different. And then what also caught my eye was in the center of the board, there's this giant sort of what looks like a floating, because it's on a little flying stand, base of some kind, like almost like a starport, but old school starport, like a stylized sort of Renaissance era starport. And then also on the board are all these Age of Sail stylized ships, but they're all on flying stands. So there's like flying Age of Sail ships, three-dimensional models with similar gray hulls, but different colored plastic rigging. So they all jump out at you. There's a green one, there's a purple one, there's a blue one. And then there are all these on flying stands on different heights. There are whale-type creatures that seem to be flying around on this round, gaseous planet. And I'm looking at this thing, and I'm like, wow, is this like a Age of Sail game, but you're floating in, on a planet? You're in space or something, and you're sort of some kind of whaling game, but there's also combat. And I'm looking at, there's also player mats out there with cool stylized art. And so what sort of got me was the theme. The table presence also just oozed the theme, and the theme was right in my alley, right? If you think about, the Disney Treasure Planet movie where you had Age of Sail ships inexplicably flying through space, it's that sort of look, right? And I was like, wow, this, and I'm not even sure what you call that. Is it steampunk? Is it, I don't even know. I don't know. Does that have a genre? Does genre have a name? I don't even know, but let me know. Email me if there's a name for that genre. But anyway, super cool looking. And so I'm looking at this going, this seems like my kind of game. But unfortunately, the demo hadn't started. There was nobody there. The game was just set up. So I took some pictures, put it on the Twitter feed. I was like, this is neat. And there was a game box there, so I knew it was called Windward. So I started wandering around the vendor hall, as the vendor hall opened a little later. And sure enough, eventually I stumbled upon the booth with Windward. Now, the interesting thing is the company that makes Windward, and let me hang on, forgive me for a minute, I'm going to grab the box cover here. Grabbing the box here. See, the weird thing about it is there's no, publisher name on the box itself. So there was like, that's interesting. And then looking at the rule book too, you have to sort of go to the inside cover and find where they talk about, the credits. And it's Playmonster is the only company I can see on here. And it was definitely a Kickstarter. And their booth was relatively small. And they had a pretty good stack, though. A pretty good stack of Windward boxes, obviously, for sale. I didn't know when I first saw it was going to be for sale. It was one of those pending Kickstarters. Hasn't come out yet. And they also had a pile of these Windward books. And they looked like hardcover. Really nice coffee table books with like a built-in sort of ribbon bookmark and everything, really beautiful. And as you flip through it, it was just the really cool, stylized art done up on like old Renaissance era parchment with like the breather masks these guys wear. And there's images of floating at sky with like them harvesting these various sort of whale-like creatures that I later learned were called cresters. And I'm just looking through the different ships, and there's a lot of details in this book. And the guy in the booth's explaining to me that this book was one of the Kickstarter stretch goals, and it had all the art that the artist and world builder of this game had sort of come to imagine over the time. I guess it was like 6 years as they were thinking about releasing this game. So there's much more in the art book that actually made it into the first edition of the game. And I'm like, you know what? This is just too beautiful. There's too much amazing work that went into this. I gotta buy it and support this thing, even if the game is only mediocre. So I bought the game and I bought the book. And the cool part about it is I thought it was very affordable. I don't remember the exact price. I remember the book was $10 additional if you got the game. And this is looks like a $20 coffee table book, easy. And then the game itself, I want to say it was less than $50. I feel like that's what it was, which with all the components was really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about Windward. And I know I'm pulled away from the thing again here. So let's talk about this game. Let me find the rule book here. Got it. And I got the quick reference card. Got it. And I got all the box supplies so I can talk to you in detail about this. So my apologies for that audio situation just happened there. But basically, Windward in the box, you're going to get a lot of cool stuff. When you open this thing up, the sound of pulling open a game box for the first time, you get that new game smell. So wonderful. So the rule book, I will say this, the rule book is not terribly long or intimidating. I don't know if there's page. Yeah, there's like 12 pages in sort of a stylized square full color rule book with great art on the cover that mirrors the art on the box of this Age of Sail sort of floating ship heading towards a giant cresting cruster through the clouds. As you look through the book, there's some just wonderful art that obviously, some of it's from the art book, obviously. Or I don't know what the order was. Came art for the book that made into the art book or whatever. But as you look through the rule book, it does have wonderful full color pictures that really give you a feel for the game. I will say the rule book isn't terribly well organized. You can learn the rules from the rule book, but I would recommend going to Board Game Geek. Some folks have already updated or uploaded some really good quick reference guides. And there's a couple there that I printed out that I really liked and found to be very effective. So take a look at that. And I won't name the one because there's probably even newer ones by the time you hear this. But in any case, setup is pretty straightforward. You're going to, as you open the box, you're going to see all the components. And there are really a lot of wonderful, cool components. You're going to get those 6 board tiles, which is the first thing that jumps out at you because they're these sort of triangles that go to, double-sided triangles that go together to form this sort of brownish gas giant planet. And so the fluff of the game is you are on this gas giant, and you are here to harvest, make your fame and fortune, harvesting the whales, the cresters they call them, for both their gas, which basically is a form of pretty much money at this point, as well as their teeth, which is very valuable also. Now, I should say in the very beginning, there are actually 5 different ships you can play. Now, if the theme of this game already has you a little put off, you're like, well, it sounds pretty cool, Russ, but I'm not sure I can get behind harvesting whales, even if they're fantasy floating whales. I kind of feel like, that might not be the kind of thing that I would really want to do, and maybe it makes me feel a little weird. Well, I should tell you, the ships are not all identical. I mean, the models are. The plastic models are identical, except that the rigging bits are different colors, so you can easily tell them apart. They look great, by the way, with little flying stands. But each ship has a corresponding player mat of its color, and these player mats have stylized art that's unique for each ship, just looks kind of cool, and they are sort of color tinted, so the blue mat goes to the blue ship, and the red mat goes to the red ship. There's also a purple ship, and the purple ship is the naturalist, and this is the one player who, because all the ships are a little bit asymmetric, so I didn't catch this when I first looked at it. I thought the game rules for all the ships were identical, but it turns out they're not. It turns out that if you look carefully at the mats, there's a section for worker placement, more about this in a second, and in these sections, they're slightly different in each particular area. So most ships are identical except for like 1 or 2 places where you put your workers. So one of the ships is slightly faster at loading its cannons. One of the ships is slightly faster, it's prepping its longboats so they can go farther per turn. And one of the ships, the purple ship, is really very different. All the ships have a space to sort of harvest the cresters after you catch them. So just like in Age of Sail here on Earth, when we would harvest the whales at sea and render down their blubber to oil and all the things we used to do. The Age of Sail ships also do that. They harvest these cresters while at what they call sky. But there's this one ship, the purple ship, who's a naturalist. And that player does not try to harvest the whales. Instead, that player will tag the whales, and they get more renown, which is basically the victory point system in the game, for tagging the whales and then protecting their tagged whales. And so you can play that ship as sort of like the Calypso, is like Jacques Cousteau, who's more of a naturalist just doing research and out there just tagging the whales and getting it that way. Or if you want to be a little more aggressive and protect the whales and fight the other players who try to harvest them, you could kind of turn a little more like Greenpeace and the Rainbow Warrior and actually go after them. So your choice. So that role exists too in the game, which I thought was kind of interesting as well. So anyway, so back to what comes in the box. So you get this game board, 6 tiles. You do get this, what's called the trading post, which is that base I mentioned in the middle, also on a flying stand. Looks like a little floating, I would say Bespin Cloud City-like, but it's not as smooth as Bespin. It's more like, almost like, imagine a Renaissance city that sort of floats in space, kind of like that, with little like docking arms. And there's a little rotatable flag on the top, and the base, the flying stand of this thing has numbers on the bottom, one for each of the hexes. And I should mention everything is hexes. So the game board is hexes, on the base for the trading post is also hexes. And that flag on the top of the trading post is going to rotate around to indicate wind direction. And as you might expect in an Age of Sail sort style game, wind is a big deal. There's also the 5 ship, what I call they call them status boards. I call them the player boards, which is where all the rules for your ship are. And it's where you're going to keep track of all the activities happening on your ship while you're at port or at sky. There's also a sideboard for the trading post itself, where a bunch of cards are organized, the victory point tracker is, and all the things you need on the sideboard, because the main board is just fully a round board. That's the planet. Then, of course, there's those 5 plastic ships, as I mentioned, with flying stands. You're going to get, also, each ship has 2 matching longboats, which are these little rowboats that fly. So they're where their oars normally are. There's the oars are almost like, imagine they have webbing connecting together. So they're almost like little wings. It's very stylized, pretty cool. And I think the fluff here on this planet is because it's a gas giant and the atmosphere is so dense that you can get pretty good buoyancy just by putting some lighter than I want to say air, but their atmospheric gases in your ships. And that's how all the sort of the crestor whale sort of things fly. It's how your longboats and your Age of Sail ships fly. Now, what's interesting too is the flying stands come in 2 different heights. So your Age of Sail ships are on the taller flying stands, your ships, and your longboats are on the shorter flying stands. And there's also 2 types of cresters. There's the red cresters and the gray cresters. And the red cresters, like your ships, are a little bit bigger, and they're on taller flying stands. And the gray cresters are a little bit smaller, and they're on shorter flying stands. And this flying stand height is an important mechanic in the game and indicates your altitude, either high or low. And one thing to remember is stuff that's high can't interact with stuff that's low. It's like the low stuff's not even there. And so basically throughout the game, if you want to go after the gray cresters, you're going to have to use your longboats because they run low. And if you want to go after things that are high, you're going to have to use your main ship because they run high, right? You're also going to see some of the cool components. So far, everything I've described pretty much is 3D plastic. You're also going to find there are 10 what they call mate pieces, which look like little sailor dudes that are 3D sculpted from their waist up on a little base. And these are actually worker placement tokens. There's 2 of each color for all the players. And you're going to be using these on your ship's mat to indicate the kind of things your crew is doing each round to best work your ship, essentially. You're also going to have a bunch of achievement tokens, which are used to track how you're doing on achievements. So there's a bonus rule that I strongly recommend you play with. I think it adds a lot to the game. There's a second deck of achievement cards that you can deal out early in the game that give you sort of side quests that if you achieve them, you get more renown, which again is the victory points for the game. More about that in a second. So I think those are fun. So you have little tokens to track those because each player can achieve each achievement only once. But most of the achievements are not exclusive. It's not sometimes the first player to get some bonus points, but everybody can always achieve the achievements. There's also a bunch of status trackers for your ships, and these are cute. You can tell this is a Kickstarter stretch goal because all the status trackers are actually little plastic color-coded 3-dimensional models of your ship. And so these go on the victory point tracker. So the victory point tracker isn't just some wooden disc. It's actually a little 3-dimensional model of your ship, which is pretty cute. You got that for your victory point tracker, as well as several other things you're going to maintain on your ship status card. I already mentioned all the cresters. You get 8 gray cresters, 8 red cresters. Again, these are plastic with bases. You get 1 giant white quester, which is for a special game mode, which is basically you go hunt Moby Dick, which can be a co-op version of the game. You get, also what's kind of cool, again, a stretch goal, there are a bunch of crester teeth tokens, but they're not tokens, they're actually plastic 3-dimensional little carvings of these crester teeth. And there's gray ones and red ones. These are essentially things you'll harvest, you'll get during the game, kind of like a resource that you will then turn in back at the trading post for renown as well. A bunch of black dice, which are D6s, but they're all custom D6s for this game with a certain number of pips on each side. There's also 1 blue D6 wind die, which is the actual, the only real D6 in the game with normal siding on it. And then there's a bunch of cards also, which have really cool sort of stylized line drawing, almost like pencil drawing art of different kinds of things that you can supplies for your ship. There's rum in there. There's reloading your cannons in there. There is, did I mention coffee in there, for example? All kinds of things you can get. And there's also a bunch of thick cardboard crew tiles, because on your ship's player mats, there are spots where you can add new crew members, basically different kinds of mates, a first mate, a naval officer, things like that. And by putting those tokens on your big ship, not only do they give your ship new abilities, but they'll also open new slots where you can carry more loaded cannons or carry more gas you harvest and things like that. More longboats, because you only start the game with 1 of your longboats, and by getting 1 of your crew members, you can upgrade to two longboats. Also tons of tokens, gas tokens, cannon tokens for all that stuff. Also some interesting, a bunch of tokens. I won't go through all the tokens in the game. So that's basically it. And based on the components, the amount of plastic you get in the game, I think it's well worth its price. I mean, especially with all the Kickstarter upgrades that are in the retail version of this game, like the little the turn trackers for these ships. I mean, it's bordering on the edge overproduced, but I hate the term overproduced because I don't think it exists. I think well, let me rephrase. I think when a game becomes so expensive that the average gamer can't afford it, and there's no more affordable version of the game, I would argue that overproduction has probably hurt the game. But in a game like this, where the price point is reasonable, like around $50 for what you get, and that's still, cheaper than taking a family of 4 to the movies, I think you got to argue that this has got the sweet spot of great table presence for the value, as well as the gameplay. So you be the judge of that, but I think it's pretty cool. Plus, you factor in the art. The art in the rulebook is just wonderful to look at as well. So that's what you get in the box. Now, setup is pretty straightforward and easy also. So what you're going to basically do is go ahead and jump in and get that game board laid out. Now, one thing you will notice is the game board is double-sided. So one side of the game board has a smaller version of the planet, and the other side of the game board, the planet goes almost right to the edge of the board. Now, the smaller version of the planet is going to be a tougher game to play. It's going to be more aggression, more combat, and more player interaction. So that one, you definitely want to wait for your second or third playthrough if you want to try that. So definitely start on the larger version of the planet. Now, when you look at the planet, you get the board laid out. There's going to be places where you need to put things. There's going to be icons for the red cresters, and you're going to put a red crester on each of those icons. There's going to be icons for the gray cresters on the shorter bases. You're going to put those on there too. There's going to be a hole in the center of the table where that docking port, the trading port, slots into the middle, and you're going to have to line it up so that one of the numbers on the base of the trading ports aligns to each of the sort of pieces of pie. So what's interesting about the game board is not only is it divided up into 6 pieces of pie that radiate out with the seams of the pie pieces, going into the center where the base is. But those 6 pieces actually are important. Like there's mechanics around the cresters. Those are sort of their hunting grounds or where they live. And the red cresters won't leave their zone, which is sort of interesting. So those 6 zones that are defined by the actual physical, cutting of the game board are actually part of the game, which is neat. So you put all your plastic cresters down. You'll also notice there's some icons of like little floating airbags, and that indicates where there's some gas just floating for the taking. And you're going to put 2 gas tokens on each of those. So those are just like some early gets. Now that's it. The game board's set up. The next thing you want to do is set up the sideboard. Now the sideboard's going to have a couple things going on here. First of all, there's that deck of supply cards, which are different kinds of supplies you'll want to have before you go out to Sky. You're going to shuffle up the decks of supply cards, divide them up into 3 equal stacks, and then place them face up in 3 different piles on the slots on the trade board. This is the market. So you can always look at the market and see the 3 different kinds of supplies you can purchase from the supply deck. Also, there's going to be that stack of crew tokens I mentioned, the big square cardboard crew tokens. Those also get stacked for convenience on the supply board. And the interesting thing about the crew tokens is you can purchase whichever crew member you want at any time, and that's easily available and selectable. And you can tell what they do right on your mat of your ship, so you always know what to get there. So that's most of the sideboard. The only thing really left there is the 2 other sort of quick reference things. Well, actually, one's the sort of the renown / notoriety track. I keep calling it the wrong thing, but it's basically victory points. That's on the bottom, and you're going to want to put one of the little tiny mini plastic models of each player's ships there to keep track of that, right just to the left of the 1 because you're at 0 at the start of the game. And then also there's like a little area you can look at there to see what you can spend gas on. So one of the resources, the biggest resource in the game actually is the teeth, but the gas is right behind it as a way to spend things to get stuff from the trade post when you're docked there, and that's one of the things you can do. So the last thing you got to do is set up. So far setup's been really pretty simple. You flop the board down, or you snap it together. You kind of push it together. You put the base in the middle. You put plastic and tokens wherever there's icons on the board. You set up the sideboard, which all has clear labeling on where everything goes there. And the last thing you got to do, and honestly, probably one of the most fun things to do, is set up each player's play mat. Now, each of these mats represents one of the ships, and they're double-sided. One side has really cool artwork, unique to each mat, and the other side has really a bunch of different things to keep track of that kind of describes what your ship is doing. There's an area for what's currently in the hold. There's an area for your gas storage. There's an area for your ship's cannons. There's an area for the longboats. And then and there's also an area to track your morale. So you'll definitely want to put one of your little plastic colored ships along the morale tracker. You'll want to put one of your little plastic ships along the longboat speed tracker. This is how much your longboats can move. And then also there's this section where you're going to want to put next to your board, all of your mates, the little crew tokens, because there's basically a little mini worker placement area on the side of your mat, which is going to indicate what your crew is doing. And so this is part where you start to realize the theme is everywhere in this game. Just looking at your mat, there's no doubt in your mind that you are crewing a ship. This ship is going to be either at sky or at port, because there are two different sort of areas your crew can work depending on if your ship is at sky instead of at sea. You're flying, right? So at sky or at port. And then there's different little areas where you put your mate on there, and it's going to tell you what happens. At the start of the game, there's also a spot to put your ship, which is indicating it's at port, on your mat. So if your ship is at port, you put your ship's model on your mat, and then that represents the fact that it's docked in the trading post in the center of the table. And that's pretty much set up. The last thing, you got your longboat tokens. One longboat should be in a little docking area there on your ship, and the other longboat should be off to the side. You'll have to acquire that later in the game. And you do also start the game off with a few supplies. I think it's like one supply each there as well. So you're ready to get started. All right. Also, maybe I think it's 3 supplies. You do just have 3 supplies there. So now you're ready to get started. That's the beginning of the game. Now, the last thing you're going to do is decide who's going to be player 1. You can use the wind direction D6 for this. And then also you're going to indicate the starting wind condition, the wind direction for the game as well. And the starting player will roll that also. And to figure the wind direction out, you're just going to roll the D6. You're going to get a number, obviously 1 through 6, and you're going to look at the bottom of the trade post base, which is also numbered. And you're just going to move the flag on the top of the trading post to point in the direction indicated by the number matching the base that matched the die you rolled, and that the number you rolled, and that's going to indicate the direction of the wind, right? Now you're ready to get started. And during your turn, it's really pretty straightforward, although there's one mechanic that's a little bit nuanced, and that's how you move. So basically during your turn, it's really pretty simple. You're going to be able to either move the ship or use a supply card, or do an action by moving one of your little mate tokens onto a spot on the mate card, on your card. And the spot they can move to can't have a mate already on it, and it has to match where your ship currently is. So in other words, if your ship is at sky, you have to put a mate on one of the spots that's at sky. If the ship is at port, you have to put your mate on one of the spots where the ship is at port. Now, the interesting thing is, in a single turn, you could be both at port and then later at sky, or vice versa. So you could end up by the end of your turn have mates in multiple places, right? Because you have 2 mates at the beginning of the game to use. So during your turn, basically, you get 4 move actions, and then you can use all your mates as well, and then any supply cards can be played. So you can do a lot during a turn. Your turn can be very involved and can have a lot of activity. Now, movement is sort of interesting, and it's the part of the game that I wish they had a movement point tracker somewhere on the card, and I would strongly recommend you get some sort of little indicator or set of tokens or something to use for this. Because what we found would happen is we had to do that, because otherwise you'd forget where you were in your movement point. So let me explain how this works. So during your turn, you're going to move your ship. You can also, as I said, move your mates around. So you start at port. Now you might decide you want to do a few things at port before you leave the ship. Maybe you want to have your mates, and you'll notice things you can do sort of while you're at port include things like get some supplies, which means you draw more supply cards, or it means you can load the cannon, so you put a cannon token on your ship. Or it means you can, buy a round of ale for everybody and increase your morale by 1. Everybody's morale starts at 1, by the way, and maximum is 4. All important resources. And one of the big things to know is at the end of your turn, if you end your turn at sky, right, so you're flying, you must either discard a resource token, you just discard a supply card, or you lose a point of morale, right? So, and again, more theme here, right? The longer you're at sea, the longer you're at sky, your ship, your crew's either losing morale or you're keeping them well fed, right? By burning supply cards, right? You can burn any supply card you want for this. Now, there are some supply cards like rum that increases morale at sky. So there are things you can do and acquire, just, again, sort of fluffy, theme-wise, to keep your crew happy while you're at Sky and stay at Sky for longer periods of time. But the trick is, before you go to Sky, you're going to want to make sure your ship is well supplied with supplies, rum, or whatever else you can get together, which is why you might want to take a couple of actions with your mates while you're in port to build up your supplies before you set sail. But when you're ready to move, here's what you're going to do. To move one hex, it is normally, or to undock or dock, it is one movement point. We have 4. So if I want to move my ship out of port and onto the map, all I would do is say, I'm going to move. I spend 1 movement point. I'm keeping track of this mentally, but this is one part of the game that's missing a little something. They should have a token for this. And then I'm going to take my ship out of its little, my player card where it's a dock, and I'm going to put it in a hex adjacent to the trading post, any hex I choose. And now I'm ready to start moving. Now, there's a nuance to movement, and it's based on the wind. If I move, I can never move directly into the wind. So the wind is going to show a direction on the base, and that's going to align to all the different cardinal directions of the hexes on the board, right? So I can never move in a hexagonal direction that would be moving directly upwind, right? So that's just nothing I can do about that. You can't. Now, if I want to move in any other direction, except with the wind, directly with the wind, I spend 1 movement point. So if I want to move, 1 point off the wind and kind of go back and forth and sort of tack upwind, left, right, I can do that 1 point per thing, which wouldn't be very far. But here's the other interesting thing. If I move exactly in the direction of the wind, so if I move in the hexagonal direction that matches the wind, I can move an infinite number of squares or hexes. I can just keep going. And actually, it costs nothing to even move 1. So if I spend 1 to leave the base, and then I say I'm moving with the wind, it doesn't even cost me a movement point to slide like halfway across the board or all the way across the board, which is sort of interesting, right? And then if I need to tack 1, move over 1, I spend 1 movement point again. Now, there's a couple of other interesting movement options that are built into the game board. There are these double arrows along the edge of the world at various spots. And if I end on those double arrows and spend a movement point, it allows me to wrap around the globe, right, the other side of the planet, and come back on the other side. There are also these little tempest squares, look like little eyes of the storm. If I'm in one of those and spend a movement point, I can basically teleport to any other tempest on the board. One other thing about movement, you'll also notice there's little floating rock icons on the board. This is impassable terrain. You have to navigate around those things, right? So that's your turn. That's basically how movement works. And so what's going to happen, though, is you're going to move, maybe go to Sky for 1 movement point. You're going to zip halfway across the board because you're going with the wind. Maybe you're going to tack upwind once, and that's going to maybe put you near one of the cresters you want to harvest. Now, I should mention, the way you win the game, I skipped that step. To win the game, what you want to do is get the most renown, and there's 15 renown points on that sideboard. The first player to 15 is going to win, right? Now, the primary way to get renown in the game is actually by getting crester teeth and bringing them back to the trading post. And when you dock at the trading post, as a free action, you can turn in any number of crester teeth, and those crester teeth, gray crester teeth are worth 3, red crester teeth are worth 4, right? And you only got to get to 15, so it's not that hard to get there with some crester teeth. And there are other ways to get renown as well. For example, when you end a turn at Sky, right, you get 1 renown just for being out there and being famous and being brave enough to fly around. So in 1 turn, if you were able to somehow get a red crester, bring it back to base, harvest it, turn the tooth in, and end back at Sky, you get 5 points, which is a lot. But it's pretty hard to do all that in 1 turn. All right, so back to your turn, right? I've moved a little bit. I've ended up next to a gray crester. Now I've got a couple options here. I probably don't want to go after a red crester in the beginning of the game. More about combat in a second. So I'm going to go after a gray crester. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's these 2 heights of pegs in the game, right? There's the flying stands that are tall and the flying stands that are short. Now, your ship is on a tall flying stand, and the gray cresters are on the short flying stand, which means I can't interact with the gray cresters. I can move right through their spaces. I can end on them as a tall ship, but it's like they're not there. I can't do anything with them. To get to the gray cresters, I got to launch the longboats. Now, to launch the longboats, it's really simple. Again, all these sorts of actions are things my mates can do on the mate worker placement part of my ship's mat. So I look down there and I see I can launch a longboat. So I take one of my mates and put him on launch a longboat, and that allows me to take my little longboat token from my ship and put it in the same hexagon as my big ship. So now my longboat has launched and it's floating around with my big ship. Now I want to move my longboat. Now, the trick to moving longboats is there's a separate movement track of movement points on your ship's card for your longboats. And this track starts at 0. Now, there's another mate action you can do, which increases the movement points of your longboats. Basically, you're getting the crew ramped up and ready to row the longboats. So you move one of your mates onto that, And for most ship, this increases your longboat speed by 3. So you move your longboat speed tracker, which is on your mat, up to the 3 number. Now, as I want, and again, it's still my same turn, by the way. I've left the port for 1 movement point. I move the ship. I've launched a longboat for one of my mate actions. I've energized my crew for rowing for the longboats for my second mate action. And now I'm going to spend my movement points on my longboat tracker to move the longboat, all in the same turn. So I move the longboat out. It gets to the Gray Crester, right? So the longboat has entered the Gray Crester square. Great news, but now there's going to be a fight. So whenever things of the same altitude get to the same space, there is a fight. This happens whenever a full-size ship at height 2 gets in the same square as a Red Crester, or a longboat gets in the same square as a Gray Crester, or 2 player ships get in the same square. They would also fight. Combat in this game is really, really simple, right? I'm describing all this now because basically combat happens in turn 1 quite easily, because these things because you can go infinite direction in one direction of the wind, you can get there easily. So I'm at the Gray Cresters. I've launched my longboat. They've sailed over to the little crester there, and now I'm going to have the combat. Now, the way combat works is on your player mat, it shows you the strength of all the things in the game. So a longboat is strength 1, your full-size ship is strength 2, the Gray Cresters are strength 1, and the Red Cresters are strength 5, right? So when 2 things fight, you're going to roll a number of black dice, which are these special custom black dice in the game, equal to the strength of the things involved. So if a Gray Crester is fighting a longboat, the player to your left will roll for the Gray Crester, and you'll roll for your longboat, right? Now you want to get greater than number of hits on the dice than your opponent does, right? Than your target does. So if I roll a 2 and the Gray Crester rolls a 1, yay, I've beaten the Gray Crester, and I can knock the Gray Crester over on his side. Now my little longboat is now towing the Gray Crester, who's still floating in the sky, but he's dead now, back to the main ship to be harvested. Now, this could be done in 1 turn if I still have enough longboat movement left to get him back to my ship. So if my ship came up and was only 1 hex away from the Gray Crester, and then I launched a longboat and I used a mate to get 3 movement on the longboat, and the longboat moves 1, right? Then I fight the Gray Crester. I can reduce the movement tracker on my longboat movement tracker down 1 more to move the longboat back into the same square as my ship. For free, the longboat is reloaded on the ship. The Gray Crester goes into my ship's cargo hold, which is an area on my card also. And yay, I've done it. All right, did all that 1 turn. Now, if the Gray Crester had tied, because tie goes to defender, or beaten me, then what would have happened was my longboat would have been destroyed, and the longboat would have been sent back to my ship and goes back on top of my ship's card like it never launched. And that would have been the end of that attempt. But the good news is the game has a neat little catch-up mechanic. And basically, whenever you lose a battle, right, you get this little token that is +2 hits, and you put it in your cargo hold. And this token can be spent in any combat to increase the results. It's as if you roll 2 more hits on your dice. So if you go into a battle with one of these tokens, you can be guaranteed you got +2 the result. It's a great way to you lost and you wasted all those actions to try this attempt on the Gray Crest and it didn't work out, but you got a +2 token for next time. This is a very smart mechanic. It's a nice little catch-up thing. And it happens anytime you lose a battle for any reason. You always get one of these little +2 things, which is pretty cool. Now, there's other ways you can mitigate the luck of dice in combat as well. For example, there are supply cards you get, such as harpoons, which can be used whenever you're fighting a crester to add numbers to your dice after you roll them. There are cannons on your ship. So when ships are fighting each other, you can discard cannon tokens before you roll the dice to increase your dice pool by 1 for each cannon token, for example. So you want to load all those cannons when you're having fights. Now, cannons can't be used on longboats. They don't have cannons, but they can be used in the big ships. And this is really important because, as I mentioned, the strength of a Red Crester is 5. And the way these custom dice are built, all the sides have at least 1 hit on them. I think 3 of them have 1s, 2 of them have 2s, and 1 of them has a 3, right? So the Red Crester's always going to get 5 minimum when he's fighting. So you don't want to go up against a Red Crester with your longboat or even your 2-dice ship without some extra tools of the trade with you, like loaded cannons or some bonus supplies to do extra damage or whatever you need, right? Or a bunch of those +2 result tokens. You need something, because straight up against a Red Crester, you're going to lose. And speaking of Red Cresters, so let's say all this worked out so far. I launched my ship. I got my little longboat there to the Gray Crester. I actually rolled well and beat the Gray Crester in combat, hauled him all the way back to my ship, got him on board. Now, there's a couple problems, though. I can't just, even if I have the ship movement left, and I could, and this is why you need a separate tracker for your movement. I've only used 2 of my movement points for my ship, for example. And here I am already. I've had a big battle. I've got the Gray Crester. I'm ready to come home. I might have the movement points to make it back home, maybe. Although if I got this far away from it, it's probably going with the wind, and now the wind's probably in the wrong direction. But even if I did, you can't enter port with a crester in your hull. You got to process the crester. And that is another action for your mates. And because I only have 2 mates, and I've used them both already to ready the longboats and launch the longboats, then I don't have to do any processing. So my turn is pretty much over here. And now I just want to set myself up my last couple of movement points for next turn. But here's the thing you got to watch out for. At the end of your turn, a couple things will happen. One, as I mentioned, you got to burn a supply card or a point of morale. And if you can't do either of those things, your ship basically is destroyed. More about that in a second. So that's one thing that has to happen. But then also, I will gain the red crester will then move. So now there's a red crester in each pieces of pie of the board. Remember I mentioned there's 6 board sections and there's like slices of pie where the board goes together. Well, it turns out the way the red crester icons are set up, there's always a red crester in each piece of the pie, right? And if you were to kill a red crester, a new one spawns. So there's always a red crester. At the end of a player's turn, the red crester in your piece of the pie will take the shortest path possible to get to the active player's ship. And he'll ignore other players. He's going right for the active player. If he makes it, and he moves 3, by the way. If he makes it, he ignores the wind. So if he makes it, there will be an immediate fight, and the red crester's strength is 5. And if you're not ready for that, you're going to be in trouble. So now later, at higher levels, players will actually use this to their advantage to draw the red crester into a free battle and get the kill. But before that happens, right, you got to stay away from those. So those last 2 movement points I might be using now to get away from the red crester, maybe dart around behind some of the floating rocks for cover or just get far enough away so that red crester can't reach me. Now again, the red crester will never hit my ship if there's another active player, so it'll ignore me if it's someone else's turn, and the red crester will never cross the slices of pie. They'll never leave their hunting grounds, if it were. So that's pretty much the whole turn. I'm going to try to get away from him and my turn and set myself up for next turn. And again, when ships fight, and all combat is that simple, you just roll the dice equal to the strength, high number of things hit. If you're fighting ships, if ships are ever fighting, ships take morale damage equal to the difference in the dice roll, right? So if you win by 2, I'm going to take 2 morale damage. If my morale goes to 0, the good news is there's no player elimination. The bad news is all my stuff in my cargo hold basically drops into the hex where I was. So basically, if I was hauling some freshly killed cresters, the other player would now be able to grab all that because it'd be dropping onto my ship. And my ship, it goes back with 1 morale and respawns basically back at the trading post. So I lose what was over in my hold, and I'm just reset with 1 morale. So it could mess me up if I had a really great run at Sky and had a lot of stuff harvested to bring back to base. And remember, the thing to remember is you can't return to the trading post with a crester in your hold. So you really got to have enough time to process this thing and get that going on. Now, to process a crester is really simple. It's just you have to have a free mate to do it, and you just move your mate on process crester. And what that does is when you process a crester out at Sky, you gain 1 tooth of a matching color of that crester, either red or gray. And those are the things that when you get back to base, you turn them in for prestige or renown, which is your victory points. And in addition to that, you also get gas equal to your current morale. So you're a happier crew. It does a better job harvesting these cresters and giving yourself gas. Gas is important because when you get back to base, you get gas tokens, and there's a number of token storage on your ship's card. In the beginning of the game, maxes at 4, but you can upgrade your ship to have more than this. So when I harvest a crester and get back to base, not only can I turn that tooth in for, if it's gray, 3 renown, if it's red, 4 renown, but I can also spend gas on different things. I could buy more supplies. I could reload cannons with it. I could buy a round of ale to increase morale. I can also spend 2 gas to get 1 renown as well. So I can actually use gas to also get victory points. So when I get back to port, if I've got a red crester tooth, a gray crester tooth, and I got enough gas to buy 2 points of renown, that's 3 for the gray, 4 for the red, that's 7, and 4 points around is 2 more. So I'm at 9, and you only need 15 to win. Now, that would be really hard to pull off in one turn, in one return to base, but I actually saw it done one game. It can be done. So you can get a lot of points, but when you're out there with all that stuff in your ship, you become a very tempting target for other players to go after. And there's a lot of supply cards that allow you to attack the player in different ways. And while you can see what supplies people are buying, so you know what they have, once they've got them, they're kind of hidden. So unless you have a really good memory, it might be sort of hard to track in a 4 or 5 player game who's got what and running around with what on their ship. So that's pretty much the whole game. You move your ship around. You're going to do all kinds of actions. captures the theme really, really well. You really feel like you're working a ship at Sky, you're hiring your crew. You're trying to decide, well, if I get this crew member, it'll add +2. If I get a harpooner, it adds +2 against cresters, but it doesn't do anything when I'm fighting other ships. If I add maybe a marine, I'm better against ships, but it doesn't do so much against cresters, especially not for the longboats sort of thing. So you can kind of decide, you can kind of build a play style in there. Am I going to be more of a pirate? Am I going to be more of a whaler? If you're the naturalist, you got a whole different set of things you're trying to do. Really interesting, and you're really trying to maximize that turn. A couple things about it. I really like the theme. I really like the look of it. I like the feel of it. I like how it rolls. How the game just plays out, and the theme is really wonderful. Again, the rule book, a little tricky to absorb. If you watch one of the many how-to-play videos out there, it'll make it a little easier, or if you get one of those quick reference cards I mentioned at Board Game Geek, I think you'll really you'll learn the game a little faster. But the game just really oozes that theme. I love seeing the little longboats sort of dragging the little cresters back to the main ship. It's fun to watch the players sort of build their cannons up and go after those red cresters. It's fun to see the red cresters try to take other players out, and players try to hide behind each other and get out of the way. And when you're trying to maximize that turn, it's really interesting to watch. The only real miss here is there's only 2 real dings against the game I can think of. One, I wish the rule book was a little better laid out in terms of easy to learn the game, because it's not a very complicated game. That's the nice thing about it. It's not that heavy. It just is. It feels a little more intimidating than it is when you first set it up. And the second part, I wish they did differently. They got that great movement tracker on the shipboard for tracking the movement points of your longboats. I think they missed a trick with a movement point tracker for the main ship, because there's so much that can happen between each movement point in the main ship. It's easy to forget how I've spent 2 movement points yet. I've only spent 1, and that's huge, because that's really the only limiter on what you can do a turn is your mates and your movement points for your ship. So I think there should have been a tracker for that, but that's easy to fix. Just get yourself some little, jelly beans or something to track the turns, or whatever you want to do to keep track of what you've done this turn in terms of movement points. But a lot of fun. We had a wonderful time playing it. First time with 3 other gamers. I haven't played games in a long time. Broke it out. We all learned it together. And we were into it right off the bat. Really enjoyed it. Had a really nice finish. The way the end of the game works is as soon as one player hits 15, that's going to be their last turn of the game, and every other player will get 1 more turn until it returns back to the player who hit 15 first. So you do have a chance to sort of catch up, and you can score them more than 15 points. So that player, he actually ended at 16, and then it went around the table 1 more time, and I was able to sneak into port with 2 teeth and enough gas to just eke past him for 17 points and actually win the game, which was pretty fun. Again, it looks beautiful on the table. It's just a game that just really feels great, looks great, is super fun to play, and it's not too intimidating. So I think you'll like it on the D6G rating system. As you remember, the D6G rating system is the chance you will like the game on a roll of D6, the probability. And I would say the average gamer, the average Joe, I'm going to give it 4+ for the average person, because it looks great. I think it plays really nicely. There's a little bit of luck with the dice, but you can mitigate it pretty well. But if you are an Age of Sail person and you just like the idea of sailing ships, you like the idea of sort of role-playing a captain and watching your ship advance and grow as you go, I'm going to give this one a 3+. I think there's a lot going on here, and I think there's some pretty good replayability with a double-sided board and some of the other scenarios they have set up here. And there's a new Kickstarter that just ended that it's going to add a lot more to the game as well, so I'm looking forward to what comes out of that. But Windward, 3+ for Age of Sail fans, 4+ for everybody else. Check it out today. This is a good one. I like this one a lot. And there you have it. There's Windward. Until next time, happy gaming.
Achievement unlocked. You've made it to the end of another D6 Generation episode, the podcast whose humor has universally been acclaimed as not too horrible. Please let us know what you thought of the show by emailing us at info@thed6generation.com. If for some inexplicable reason you actually enjoyed this show, you can help others find out about it by leaving positive reviews on iTunes. Thanks for listening and happy gaming.